Do I think that there is other forms of life out there somewhere? I'm on the there's a good chance side.
But also, I think that the universe is vast enough that there's probably lots and lots more life out in space. We just haven't found it because it's just vast.
Now we're finding exoplanets all over the place.
Like a limitation of technology, do you think that you could reach them? We're not listening in those forms right now.
No, it's just inefficient. Why would you broadcast radio waves that are going to get just lost into space?
Yeah, definitely. Like if I was an alien species and I'd been viewing our planet for the last, say, 20,000 years, I wouldn't engage conversation either. We are like that crazy dude in a bus stop. You know, we stink, we're horrible to each other, you know, we're wrecking the place we live. Would you want to be friends with us? I wouldn't.
We have not shown a great ability to work well with other cultures. Not only are you not the only beings, but maybe you're not the most intelligent and developed. Mm-hmm. You know, it seems like God loves them a lot more than us.
From Outface Productions, this is Listening Glass. Today's topic requires a bit of setup, and the first thing we need to talk about is something called the Drake equation. Have you heard of it?
No.
You haven't? Oh, that's exciting. Or are you just playing?
You know, okay. I'll say this. I know that there is a thing called the Drake equation, but I have not actually read about it.
Okay. It's actually a very simple thing where this guy, something Drake, came up with it in the early 60s. This was right around when people were starting to talk about actively exploring for extraterrestrial life. He wanted to figure out
UFOs and stuff?
Yeah, like
All
aliens. Right. Okay. So he wanted to figure out, okay, what's the likelihood that there's other planets that have civilized life on it that are able to communicate with us? He just went through a series of basically ifs. So it's a series of circumstances that would lead a planet to have civilized life. And so it's just a number of factors. So the first one is he takes into account the average rate of star formation in the galaxy, and then multiplies that by the fraction of stars that have planets, and then multiplies that by the number of planets that can potentially support life per star that has planets. So this is the way to think of that is it's the number of planets around a star that could support life. And sometimes people talk about this like Goldilocks zone where, for example, Mercury is very close to the sun. Too hot. Pluto's way out there, and it's not even a planet anymore. Too cold. And Earth is in this little, they call it Goldilocks zone, where it's just right? Okay. And so
what you're saying is we live on a porridge planet?
That doesn't sound too bad. It's better than, you know, how some people would describe our planet. But we have a wonderful planet, all things considered. And so that's the next step in the equation. And then how many of the planets that can support life will support life that develops civilizations? And then from there, how many of those civilizations will develop technologies that's detectable by us? And then the final thing on the cake is whether or not those civilizations existed at a time where they sent signals that we would detect them currently, or during our period of time where we're actually scanning for them. And we've only been scanning for them for a little more than 50 years, right? And actively listening.
Yeah.
Which on a cosmic scale is not a very long time at all. So that's the Drake equation. It's really cool. I even heard a podcast once that talked about romance and like the likelihood of finding a girlfriend in a geographic area based on this kind of reasoning.
Okay.
It's like, well,
Fair
how many
enough.
people are women and how many people are, you know, not over 6 feet, and how many people have like a college degree or like whatever your criteria are. And that, I think, I don't know if it was Radio Lab that did that, but it was an interesting show. So,
all right. So what are we talking about today?
okay, that's the Drake equation. How likely is planet to exist? And the people who've crunched the numbers on this basically have come to...
Let's just get clear. So how likely is it that there are other planets in existence which could theoretically support life?
Intelligent life that can communicate.
Intelligent life that can communicate.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's where we're at. And I'm just going to go a little bit more into detail just because everyone has come to the conclusion that it's extremely likely that there's other planets that have civilized life that should be talking to us.
Is everyone?
Everybody.
Everyone who's anyone.
Go talk to the guy at the bus stop.
Yeah.
Okay, he's gonna be like, yeah, I totally,
Totally.
I have got my napkin math right here, and it totally checks out. We should just be swimming,
It's just highly likely.
swimming in alien signals,
ETs.
right?
Should
Like
just be.
there should be
phoning
a
home.
Tinder for aliens. Why isn't there? That's why. So that's what we're talking about today. Why don't we have Tinder for aliens? And, well, can I go into math right now? Just a little bit, just some numbers.
All right, we'll play our math jingle, and I'll find a math jingle we can
Thanks.
put in this segment.
That's gonna be helpful.
So we'll play our math jingle. Go ahead, Robin.
Okay,
Tell us
so
about some
there's
numbers.
100 billion galaxies in the universe, each with 100 to 1,000 billion stars in them.
Okay, that's a lot.
Okay, we think there's roughly one planet per star on average. So
That could support.
no,
like-
just planets. So like for every star out there, we think that there's about one planet around
Really?
it. We have 8 planets.
So we're atypical.
Sure.
We're
Above average.
Galacto atypical.
As always.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you're
Okay.
right.
And
When are we never not exceptional?
yep. Now it doesn't matter what's in the universe because most of it's super unreachable. So the only stuff that we really care about is what's in the local group, which is basically us, the Milky Way, and our neighboring galaxy Andromeda. And all of the other galaxies and galactic clusters are all moving away from us way too fast for us to ever really be able to catch up.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's now, quick question. Are they observable to us? Can we see them right now?
Can we see the other galaxies?
Yeah, can we see the ones that we're never going to catch up to?
I think yes. Yep.
Okay. Can you and I see them in the night sky, or would we need more?
We can see galaxies for sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Most of them look like stars.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, they're just moving. How fast are they moving away from us? Is it like orders of light speed?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, it's not going to be faster than light, right? And so they're probably. I just don't know. I don't know the answer to
Fair.
that.
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
But what I do know is that things seem to be accelerating away from each other.
Okay.
They're not just moving fast; they're moving
They're
faster.
Picking up speed.
So if you're going to catch them, you have to move faster than they are moving faster.
Right. Like that's.
I'm glad you got
I like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, we have to first overcome how fast they are moving away from us.
Right.
And then we have to apply additional speed
Yeah.
to make any kind of headway.
Right.
Yeah.
So who cares about them? They're dead to us. And we care about the local group and even more so, the stars that are in the Milky Way galaxy. So the Milky Way has 400 billion stars, which is, so just think about all the grains of sand on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
For every grain of sand we have, there's 10,000 stars in the Milky Way galaxy.
Whoa, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay.
No wonder it's milky.
So we're starting to scrape the scale of what we're talking about. And that's just in our galaxy, and that's all we care about. And of those 400 billion stars, we think about 20 billion of them are sun-like and could have a sun that's kind of supportive of planets that might have an Earth. And so of those 20 billion suns, we think a fifth of them have an Earth-sized planet. I don't know how they determine this. In its habitable zone, so in the Goldilocks zone. So now we're down to a mere 4 billion stars with planets in the Goldilocks zone.
Okay.
So still good odds, right?
Yeah, still looking good.
Tinder for aliens, it's coming right up. It's looking good.
We're at version 0.2 right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool.
And the thing is, things are really far apart. And even with things being far apart, we've been around for long enough that most of the stars you see in the night sky are within 3,000 light years.
Okay.
right? So if someone like shines their cell phone light at you from one of those really far away stars that we can see, it'll take 3,000 years to get here. And
Which, as I understand it, is relatively small.
very small,
Okay.
right? So the universe is about 14 billion years old. Our planet itself is 4.5 billion years old.
Mhm.
So there's been a really long time for life to develop on all of these other planets, where
Sure.
just like us, they could have developed literally billions of years ago
Mm-hmm.
or hundreds of millions of years ago. And, you know, depending on how far away they are, we'd be receiving signals. So, you know, people who've crunched the numbers are like, where are all the aliens? And that brings us to the kind of crux question, which is called the Fermi Paradox.
Dun dun dun.
Yep, cue the theme music.
All right.
So that's the topic.
So we're talking about the Fermi Paradox. And so, okay, Robin, explain to me how the Fermi Paradox came to be known as the Fermi Paradox.
This was fun because it made me think about what paradoxes are. And, you know, we're going to get all Webster Dictionary on you guys, basically, about what this fucking word means. But, so para means contrary to, and doxa means opinion. And it's the idea of basically having two contrary, mutually exclusive opinions that are equally viable. And so the two opinions in this case are there's life all over the universe. And the other one is we have zero evidence of there being extraterrestrial life.
Right. So on the surface of it, two things which both seem true, which can't both be true if we accept like a regular logic.
Right.
Okay.
And so most people go about this from here trying to disprove that life is likely, or that yes, basically the one direction to go is that intelligent life that is civilized and communicative is in fact very rare. Which makes the most sense to me. I guess the other direction you could go is that there's a bunch of it and we just, you know, ignore the signs. Like, I mean, crop circles, come on.
Well, so I think this is something that's interesting to me, is that when you have a paradox, you have two sides to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you want to start digging into it, you can tackle either side of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think when a lot of people think about the Fermi Paradox, they start, you know, they pick one part of it to either prove or disprove. So why is it called the Fermi Paradox, Robin?
Oh, right. The Fermi part. Is that,
Yeah.
that's what you're asking? We did the paradox part. So Fermi, named after a physicist who, I think he was a physicist, came up with
Yep. Enrico Fermi.
Enrico Fermi. When was it? You got that?
Yep. So it was the summer of 1950.
1950. So this is oldish. And
So he, this is interesting actually. He was part of a group of people working on the Manhattan Project. I don't know
oh,
if you knew that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is quite interesting.
So he was the first person to be like, yo, where's everybody? We should just be swimming in signals and evidence of aliens based on what we're presuming, which is actually that he even predated the Drake equation a little bit.
Yeah, he did.
Right.
He did.
But, you know, people had probably done their own napkin math, including Fermi, about, well, there's a lot of stars, probably a lot of planets, should be a lot of life.
Yeah.
This is well past, you know, the days of thinking we were on in a geocentric universe, right?
So yeah, so this is basically the way it happened. Was so Fermi was walking to lunch, and he was talking with some of his fellow physicists, famously Edward Teller and Herbert York, and also Emil Konopinski.
Oh, those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, those dudes, right, exactly. So they were just walking to lunch and they were just casually discussing, they were just talking about UFOs. They were talking about ETs, you know, just kind of like you would with your friends, right? And so Anyway, it was just like a very casual thing. They chatted about it. They let it go, right? They started talking about other stuff. And all of a sudden, like right in the middle of lunch, unbidden, Enrico Fermi, just out of nowhere, says something like, "Where are they?" Or, "Well, okay, like, where are the aliens then?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's interesting how it's like it had just been germinating in the back of his mind,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly it was like this bolt from the blue for him. It's
Mhm.
like, well, what the hell?
Mm-hmm. You know what? Like whenever I'll like kind of wonder spontaneously where, you know, I have a favorite T-shirt I lost a year ago. Whenever I bring that up at lunch, no one really has a second thought
They
about it.
Yeah, it doesn't spawn the Robin paradox.
Yeah.
Right? The Nelson paradox.
This guy's got some magic sauce.
If I have a T-shirt that I knew I had and I don't know where it is, well, where is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that in a future one once we've come up with the Perkins equation.
What's so special about this Fermi guy and his planets and alien life? All right.
So, okay. So basically, yeah, I'm sure that Fermi wasn't the first person to ever consider this, but he just happened to get famous about it because he kind of fixated on it. And, you know, he continued the conversation around it. And so various other, you know, physicists and astronomers over the years kind of hooked into that same question and threw up various hypotheses. And there's been a lot of discussion, and I just want to emphasize that it's really not like Fermi invented this,
Right.
or necessarily invented anything.
Interesting sociological aspect of this whole thing is to like why we're even talking about a name called the Fermi Paradox. It's interesting because like if you and I had this conversation, like how many people on LSD in the 60s or something had like a similar conversation and it just didn't see the light of day in terms of mass culture?
Yeah.
And it's the power of academia, right? And when you get a lot of kind of the intelligentsia circles together and they discuss big ideas and throw them back and forth and publish some papers, and it's not even, some of it is scientific, but a lot of this stuff is highly speculative. The Drake equation, for example, super tenuous. No, the figures that people come out on the other end with in terms of how likely it is that communicative life exists on other planets is they range widely and all with good math,
Right.
based on really bad data, because we have really shit data when it comes to this stuff.
It's true.
We know of, I don't know, maybe thousands of exoplanets that we've had some sort of observation of, and that's just a scratch,
Yeah.
you know, of what's out there.
Well, so I like that you're starting with this, Robin, around just about any topic, especially topics that relate. It's just that, like, we just don't know that much about anything.
Yep.
And anyone who's convinced that we do, I think, is kind of full of it. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't come to relevant conclusions, that we haven't come to conclusions, or that our entire reality is relative. I mean, that's like a bogus, hyperbolic level to take what I'm talking about. But I do just think it's interesting that I don't think scientists and people at large spend enough time in their days ruminating on how subjective and imperfect our own human observations and deductions about things really are. And, you know, we're so taken with this idea of like, we have big telescopes and we have modern technology and there are smart physicists and Harvard and all of this stuff, right? NASA, all of this cool stuff, which surely must be producing some hard and fast data that we can eventually hang our hats on, right?
I'll just say my faith in science has been totally dispelled by my experience with the American healthcare system.
Well, we all hook into it somewhere, right? We all learn that Santa Claus doesn't exist in some way or another.
But I think you're going to finish your thought, and then I wanted to say something about it.
Yeah, sure. So that was just it, is that I like starting this conversation with a discussion of the imperfections of human technology and perception and the quality of our deductive reasoning.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to say that people aren't smart, although they don't come up with good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I think it's always good to remember, especially in conversations like this, which are, even kind of people at the forefront of the topic are just relying on the wildest of speculations because for all that we know or think that we know about this stuff, it's a very small drop in the bucket compared to all of the stuff that we don't know about it.
Okay. Here, you ready for my impassioned case for science?
Go for it. Lay it on me.
I think that humans overall are kind of morons, including myself.
Okay.
And that
I wouldn't disagree.
90% of my ideas throughout a given day are just rubbish, right?
Yeah.
And so we become, filters. But the cool thing is that we're a species that occasionally has brilliant ideas. And those are the ones, hopefully, that we inject culturally into our society and perpetuate and spread and grow. And that, I think that's what science is about. And I think that the best scientists are the ones who have humility about what we do know and what state we're currently in. And science isn't really a body. It is it's not a body of knowledge, actually. It produces one, but it's a method, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way of dealing with ideas and information and a way of developing those in a way that it can be vetted and pushed forward. And so I'm a believer in it. And I think a lot of people, it's easy to kind of typecast scientists as know-it-alls who are arrogant, right? And who think they have it all figured out. And I think that, to be fair, I think some scientists probably do come off that way. But like I said, I think the best ones don't,
Sure.
And the best ones are humble students.
Well, such as Fermi, as a classic example.
Okay.
Yeah.
This show is sponsored by Megan Brandenburg Design, your brand illuminated. Does your project or business need a more cohesive visual identity? Do your marketing materials need pizzazz? Megan is your go-to. She also offers apparel design, product packaging design, and motion graphics. Megan worked with us to design the Listening Glass logo, and we love the stunning result. Megan is on Instagram at Megan Brandenburg Design. Find the full link in the episode description.
So, do we want to get into? Do we want to start digging into the paradox and how some people have tried to prop it up or poke holes in it?
Yeah. I think we have to. There's various ways to make sense of why the paradox exists.
Right.
So we have to explore those.
Okay, so so let's go through them a little bit. Now, there's a long list that people have come up with, and I don't think that we're going to try to be exhaustive here. I'm just more interested in, Robin, what comes to your mind? What are some of the responses to the Fermi paradox that readily jump into your mind when you think about the Fermi paradox?
Okay, the first thing that comes to mind to me is that the existence of the paradox itself is not necessarily a statement on whether or not life is likely to exist. It's a statement on whether or not life is likely to survive. Okay. And so just a really brief, terrible history of life on Earth. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Very shortly after, in the fossil records, we see life. Really simple life.
Wow.
But we see life. We see, I don't even know if I'd call them, I don't know enough about it to say that they were single-celled organisms or what, but it was probably some sort of really simple single-celled organism. Those things existed forever. And then we saw explosions of complicated life much later in Earth's history. One of the notable ones is the Cambrian explosion, which I think was about 300 million years ago. Definitely fact check me on that. And there's this development, right? So like first you have maybe not even, I don't know when the first live thing was, but let's say it's something that's not even a cell, right? It doesn't even have a cell. Maybe the first thing with a cell wall is the first thing we call alive that can reproduce.
Sure.
But before that, we might have had chemicals that were able to basically have chemical reactions with the environment that would produce replicas of themselves.
Okay.
And then those things started to get more sophisticated. And
so maybe something a little bit like a virus, perhaps?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And viruses, I'm not even sure if they have a cell wall.
They don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
they are smaller than cells.
they're bizarre, just little, they're almost like nanobots to me, the way I think about them.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good way to think of them. They're
Yeah.
like these autonomous primordial proteins. Yeah.
It was wild. They don't have any agenda. They're just self-replicating mindlessly, like
Yeah,
through chemistry.
Yeah, who else would do that?
So that's how things start, right? You just have chemistry running amok, and so then you end up with cellular organisms and mammals and birds and all of this stuff. And what the fuck was my point?
Well, I think you were building up to talking about how you were talking about how likely life is to stick around, right? To start and then to stick around.
So, life gets more complex, but it's taken nearly 4.5 billion years for us to get to the point where we have a species on the planet, us, that is technologically advanced and can manipulate the resources around it to start doing interstellar. I won't even say interstellar travel because I'm still a bit of a skeptic about that. I'll just say interplanetary travel.
Okay.
Which is well within our capability.
Just space travel.
Space travel.
Yeah.
Right? And space travel is a big thing, right? Like getting to the moon is a very different idea than getting to the nearest star system, which is Alpha Centauri, which is 4.2 or so light years away.
Yeah.
So with our current technology, if we jumped in the space shuttle and started shooting toward Alpha Centauri, it would take us 40,000 years to get there.
Woo. All right. All right.
So
it's a little longer than I've got left in me.
All right. But the whole point is it took us forever to develop life, and we've only been around for 50 years. So let's just say like we nuked ourselves tomorrow.
You mean space travel's been around for 50 years?
Yep. Space travel, as well as our ability to project signals.
Right.
To other alien life. So let's just say there's people on Alpha Centauri who are, let's say life could develop on a planet around Alpha Centauri, the closest planet, closest star system. And we've been sending signals for 60 years or so now. But let's say we nuke ourselves in a decade and civilization collapses. Yeah. And it takes, so we were sending signals for 50 years, and it's only if someone's listening during a 50-year time period on their planet that corresponds with the time that we sent it from, right? Like they'd have to hear it in the future. So that's 4 years in the future that they'd hear it if we sent it today. Yeah. And I'm just saying it's like, it's likely that we just won't exist long enough for another civilization near us to exist and hear us.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. I mean, it's a fairly cynical view of the way humanity's going, but not necessarily unrealistic.
I almost see it as not as proof, because that's not the word I want, but as a statement on the likelihood that we won't last very long. Because if civilizations that were able to harness energy on the level that we can, and even greater energy than us, then if they survived for very long, we would be hearing from them.
Well, okay, so let's go into that.
Yeah.
Why do we think that would be the case?
Because if civilizations lasted for more than 60 years, then we should be seeing these signals. So I'm saying the silence.
Why? Here's my question. Why? Like, Because are our signals even capable of, right now, are they capable of reaching Alpha Centauri?
That's a very good question. And I did some cursory research on this and didn't find anything conclusive, but
Yeah.
the stuff, the numbers that I found, and this was thin research, it was basically something on the order of 50 to 100 light years that we feel like, based on our technology, if we were sending similar signals,
Yeah.
or if aliens were sending similar signals to what we're sending, that we have equipment to detect it at that range. And the way that people do this is we have large satellite arrays on Earth that we will aim at planets or at likely star systems, right? And listen for a while and switch around. And there's different ways of doing it, but that's one of them. And so far we haven't heard a peep.
Well, it just makes me wonder if it takes 50 to 100 years for stuff to even travel that far, maybe it just hasn't even gotten to us yet.
You ever been like texting with a girl and you like send a message and then it takes her like 2 days to get back to you and you're like, you get a little anxious, you know?
I'm that person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, like, just imagine it takes 50 years, you know?
I know. I mean, you'd probably just think they weren't interested anymore, right?
I think my app idea is going to fail.
Well, all right. Let's do a little more research before we reach that conclusion. But I think, that's just one of the things that's so interesting about this is that I think it makes drawing conclusions about this very difficult because we're talking about matters of scale and we're also talking about matters of time, right? So like something that occurred to me when I was thinking about this is that there's many theories which would indicate aliens are around and it's just either we're not communicating with each other or maybe we're trying to and we're just not very good at it.
Yeah.
Right? We're just, and
Can you imagine giving up on that? Just like, it's like, you're 4 messages in and it's just like, this person doesn't get me.
They just, I made that joke about cats. They didn't go for it.
I can't imagine discovering other intelligent life and giving up on communicating with them. Right?
Like, well, I guess they didn't care, We sent out a radio signal and they didn't say anything.
There's like a whole lineage of scientists who have been trying it for thousands of years, and they're like, number 1 rule of the job, don't take it personal.
Side note, have you ever heard about the pitch drop? Okay. So this is a really fascinating experiment. And what someone did was they took pitch, which is tar, basically, and they put it in like a funnel.
And into it.
Okay. And the question was, how long would it take for the pitch to flow through the funnel and drop? And so the scientists started doing this, and it was like mid 20th century. I mean, it was a while ago. I mean, definitely like the scientists started doing this, and it was like mid 20th century. I mean, it was a while ago. I mean, definitely like first half of the 20th century. And so anyway, so the pitch, it turns out, takes about 7 to 9 years to start at the top of this funnel.
Wow.
To flow down through, to kind of accumulate into a big droplet, and then eventually snap off and fall, right?
For one drop?
For one drop. Yeah. Takes about 7 to 9 years. Okay. So then the interesting thing was the original scientist who did this.
I want to see a time lapse of this.
Oh, you can. Look up the pitch drop. You'll be fascinated. All right.
Okay.
So the original person who did this bequeathed it to somebody else.
Gross.
Okay, so the pitch drop experiment has now been handed off several times. And I think that so one of the heartbreaking aspects of this experiment is that the custodians of the pitch, they want to see it drop, right? So like, let's say that you've had the pitch like in your office for 5 years, right? Or 6 years.
I wonder how long it's in, like you see a droplet and it has a tail. There's like the isthmus,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like how long is it in the
How
isthmus
long?
phase?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Okay. And so heartbreakingly, what happened was one of the recent custodians of it, they set up a video camera because if they couldn't be present for it, they at least wanted to capture it on film. And then like some like act of God stuff happened. Like they left for a conference over one weekend, and then like their video equipment failed, and then the pitch dropped. And anyway, there's been a couple of mishaps like that. But what I'm getting at here is that this is, when you think about an experiment like that, it's a very different experience of time, right? And it kind of makes me wonder if there was extraterrestrial life out there that was broadcasting a signal. Let's say their signal had a frequency that was low enough that we wouldn't register it as a radio frequency. But in their experience of time, it was just a normal broadcast, right? I think we have to start expanding our minds to the idea that another life form's experience of space and or time might be very different from ours. We could essentially be cohabiting and interacting in some form with other life forms, and maybe we're like bacteria sized to them,
Right.
or maybe they live for 10,000 years. I mean, those life forms wouldn't necessarily resemble the kind of life that we're familiar with, but they wouldn't have to, because there's a lot of probability out there, right? And, you know, people have conjectured, you know, we're carbon-based life forms because that just happens to be a very plentiful resource on our planet. But that doesn't, you know, other ETs, they might be made out of something else.
Yeah.
right?
Silicon is the other like great candidate for that.
I've heard that. Do
Yeah.
you know why that is?
Yeah, if you look at the periodic table, carbon is number 6, and silicon. So you know how the table is arranged in columns, essentially, right? So silicon is the element directly below carbon,
Oh, okay.
and meaning
So-
the kind of chemical affinity it has toward other atoms is the same as carbon.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how. I mean, silicon is extremely common on Earth, right? And so potentially there's another very Earth-like planet that did that.
Yeah.
I think it's actually the most common element on the Earth's crust.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, again, it brings us to this very question of what is life, right? How do we define life? Because currently the only model that we have is the carbon-based life forms that we're familiar
And that
with.
brings us back to our shitty data,
Exactly.
right? We have a sample size of one intelligent life form on a sample size of one planet that has life. In a sample size of one solar
star.
system that has intelligent life on a planet around it.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. So it's kind of like the equivalent of like let's liken it to like people building boats, right? And sailing across the world. It would be kind of like we built our very first boat. Maybe we floated like a thimble in a bathtub, and we put the thimble in for like about a second, and then we took it out, right? And then imagine comparing the amount of data we gathered from that experiment to the data we now have flying airplanes across the planet. It's probably, you know, we're starting to kind of imagine the limitations of what we know compared to what we could know.
right.
And so it, you know, I think it's very likely that there are other people or other life forms out there, and we're just not reaching them yet. You know?
Yeah. Another way I like to think of it is when we're trying to figure out how likely life is, it's like rolling a dice, and let's say it has to roll a 1, right? But the number of sides the dice could have is anywhere from 1,000 to 100 billion.
Right.
So predicting the odds of rolling a 1, it's good luck. Like,
Yeah.
we just don't have the information.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know. So yeah, let's talk about a
dude!
couple.
Wow, I totally just guessed that. That's insane. Like, it just says right here between 1,000 and 100 million civilizations. So that's the range, by the way, of the Drake equation. So the range of the Drake equation in terms of how many civilizations there might be in the Milky Way galaxy. The different way that people have crunched the numbers, there's either 1,000 civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy, or there's 100 million.
I find the idea compelling that there actually is intelligent life. And so what are some other reasons that life might exist but we don't know about it?
It's dumb.
Okay, it's not intelligent enough for our standards.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, defining intelligent life is interesting.
I mean, you were talking about time scale and how that's very relative, and another one would be the scale of space. And we don't know the kind of metastructure of the universe as far as I know. So we know we're in, a small galactic local group, and there's a super cluster of galaxies, and then we have this kind of rough model of what the structure of the universe looks like. But then there's a limit to our observation. Mm-hmm. And this kind of stuff, I've never really, I guess I don't know enough about the models to really know whether or not I should trust them. There seems to be some consensus in the kind of astrophysics community about this, but the idea to me that we would know the limits of the universe is kind of absurd. Yeah. Right? I mean, even the whole, I just don't really buy into a lot of the narrative we have right now. To me, it's like, wow, like, you think like the whole universe came from a singularity? Like, the Big Bang Theory just never really struck me right. And so
I'm with you.
Yeah. I'm a heretic.
I'm happy to hear that, from one heretic to another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is, when you start drilling down into it, when you start getting specific, right? Like, okay, it's not just that life has to exist. Mm-hmm. It has to be life that we would call intelligent life. Okay.
Right. Okay.
And then it has to be life which would have a technology that we recognize as an interstellar technology.
Yep. Okay. So in a world where we're imagining anything is possible, which we're doing.
Yeah.
Then it seems really bizarre, right? To think that we would be on the same page. But I happen to believe that the observable universe, basically that we've done a decent job of discovering some very fundamental things about natural law.
Okay.
And I don't readily buy into the idea that things are radically different than what we have discovered through science.
Okay. I could get on board with that.
Yeah. And so the idea of there being a species, for example, think about electromagnetic radiation and the periodic table. Like those two things together. So we have a spectrum. Visible light is in the electromagnetic spectrum. And then we have, microwaves, radio waves, X-rays, all of these things. And we can kind of study the way that they behave. And we've used this knowledge to actually hone in on some frequencies that we think would be likely to be used for communication across galactic scales. And I believe it is a range in the microwaves. And it doesn't suffer from a lot of interference, which would be one of my main worries, right? Sure. Is you're sending energy, a signal in an electromagnetic wavelength across tens, hundreds, thousands of light years to contact somebody. And this is mostly empty space. And by mostly, I mean like inconceivably empty.
Okay.
All right. Like if you're in San Francisco, let's just say you're not in San Francisco. You're somewhere where there's a really clear sky and you try to look at something 50 miles away. There's going to be a noticeable haze there.
So,
And that haze is just like, I don't know,
like
tens of thousands of
pollution
dust
and-
particles
yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
We don't see that when we look into space. And instead of looking over 50 miles and we have that many dust particles here, we're looking over many
50
light years, right? And we
Yeah.
don't see that
We don't
sort
see
of
a haze.
Yeah. So I find that very compelling in terms of the argument that we could accurately send and receive signals.
Okay. That's fair.
And I don't know quite what the logic is that scientists follow to determine that microwaves are kind of the best bet, but they have seem to have settled, hopefully not prematurely, on a band like of wavelengths. But
So
it
it is just good to note, though, to just observe how narrow what we're sending out into the universe actually is, right? We've identified one property of the entirety of reality, which is, these magnetic radio waves that we're sending out.
Yep.
We've picked one, or maybe like several bandwidths that we're focusing on that just seem like, oh, those ones look good. Let's try those, right? So just want to bring it back to the whole idea that we're actually doing very little that might conceivably get somebody else's attention right now.
Yeah.
So anyway, continue.
I think that's totally right. So we can crunch numbers all day about how likely it is that life exists in the Milky Way,
Yeah.
but things are so far apart.
Yeah.
One of my favorite websites is one called If the Moon Were One Pixel.
Okay.
And it's a web page that scrolls, instead of vertically up and down, it scrolls horizontally. And it starts off with the sun being on the left, and
Okay.
it lets you just scroll through the whole solar system. And it just takes if you just scrolled constantly, it would take hours to get.
So you have to click and drag your mouse.
Yeah. And I think they have a system where you can click and go to the next landmark, or planet or whatever it is. And of course, or there's a button on the bottom right where you can click and it'll scroll you at the speed of light. And it just takes forever to start. It takes, 8 minutes to just scroll to the Earth, because that's how long it takes light to reach us from the sun.
Yeah.
And a little more than 8 minutes, but and that's our solar system, which is really a neat little clump of stuff, even as spacious as it is compared to galactic scales.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, I think, our main hurdle.
Yeah. Just kind of the space and potentially the time.
I mean, the space thing, and then also the likelihood that civilizations exist at the same time and are trying to communicate at the same time.
Well, so that's a really good point, because it's true. Just bringing it back to that whole concept of life has existed on planet Earth for what, 4-ish billion years?
4-ish, and us humans, right? Civilization sprang up 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The beginnings of it.
Yeah. So our space-worthy amount of time that we've existed is a tiny fraction of the amount of time that we have been kind of our human species.
Absolutely.
Which is itself a tiny fraction of the amount of time that life has existed on Earth.
We're pretty cool.
So, yeah, well, and I just think that, it does lend credence to the idea that maybe there have been many, many, billions, trillions, whatever number of civilizations, and they just haven't been alive at the same time.
Yeah.
Or maybe even if they were alive at the same time, maybe they weren't communicating in ways that registered to each other as communication.
Yep. Now, I have to pee, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the Great Filter.
Okay. The Great Filter.
I think that it's really a question of technology and means. How easy is it to put the kinds of instruments into the world and into space to ask the kinds of questions we need to ask?
I would love to just see the reaction of the whole religious sector on Earth. I think they'd be really good with it. Include aliens in the Bible all of a sudden by just reading a verse slightly differently, or saying, "Oh no, they fit in right here."
I think it's apparent from a lot of policy today that people do not care that much about the hypothetical generations to come. Judeo-Christian worldview, where you think that the world, the universe was created just for humans, and then all of a sudden that you find out not only are you not the only beings, but maybe you're not the most intelligent and developed. Mm-hmm. It seems like God loves them a lot more than us. They're not starving. They don't have diseases.
Yeah.
They get to travel to whatever planet they want. If I had a vested interest in a worldview and something like that showed up, I would resent them.
We should probably sanction them.
In the 60s, George Soros had enough funds to fake a moon landing, but now with Avatar and Titanic and what special effects are, we could introduce aliens.
We're back. And we're going to talk about something we've been dancing around for a lot of the show, which is kind of a crucial structural part of the Fermi Paradox and the way that people have dealt with it. It didn't spring up until the 90s, right? So the Fermi Paradox was 1950?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this guy, we'll call him, he's called the Great Filter, so his name is probably Great. And,
okay.
Just go with me. Okay, just
go
with
Great,
it.
Last name Filter.
Yeah, and he theorized that since we're not hearing from anyone, there must be some kind of barrier that, let's say life is really likely, there must be some kind of barrier that life runs into that it doesn't ever get past.
Okay.
In order to become, quote, intelligent, quote, civilized, quote, communicative on an interstellar level. Mm-hmm. The Great Filter, basically, imagine thousands of life forms developing very similar capabilities. So some of the first ones would be visual sensation, aural sensation with sound, being able to take advantage of different resources in their environment. Instead of photosynthesizing, being able to eat stuff. And having the senses required to hunt. And then you build that up to a civilization or to a life form that might become intelligent. And even to get that far, we look at the history of life on Earth and the occurrences that took place in order to make life anywhere near what it is right now. There were two really crucial things that happened, and we think that they only happened once. The first one was the emergence of life itself, and of any sort of singular celled organism or multicellular organism that could reproduce. And the reason that we think that it only happened once is based on all of the bacteria and life forms that exist now. Geneticists believe that they all came from one forefather.
Okay.
Right. They have one descendant.
Yeah.
And that was very early days. And then still early days, but later was the development of mitochondria. And mitochondria, and this is new enough science that we didn't learn about this when we were in high school.
Oh, wow.
So this is going to very off the cuff rough because I haven't actually studied this. I've just learned about it from other people.
Yeah.
But basically there was another unicellular organism that went into another cell, another cell of an organism, and then
an invasion.
It was an invasion, and it became a symbiosis that was perpetual.
Wow.
So
that's what mitochondria is?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That blows, because I remember learning about mitochondria, but I had no idea.
Yep.
That it was an invasive organism.
Right. And I believe they have their own DNA.
Wow.
So it's just this piggybacker that we benefit greatly from.
Freeloader.
It's a total freeloader, but it's a symbiotic freeloader.
It's like someone crashed on your couch and you were about to kick him out, but then they started doing the dishes.
Yeah.
Then they got a job and
it's
started
Eddie.
paying rent.
It's Eddie downstairs. Okay. So
it's a new respect for Eddie. Okay, so what you're saying is that these are two kind of very unique things
Mm-hmm.
which happened, and if either of them had not happened, life as we know it just wouldn't be
Exactly.
life as
And
we know
it seems like they've only happened once,
it. Okay.
right? Like we don't have parallel versions of stuff like this happening.
Like we don't have a fossil record of other stuff like this happening and then failing and then happening
Exactly.
again and then failing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Fair.
So the Great Filter could have been billions of years ago when this stuff occurred.
Yeah.
So we could already be past it and well on our way to intergalactic success.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there could be millions of life forms that have reached the point that we're at now and then ran into
There's
the Great Filter
there's
later
another
before they could
filter.
become interstellar,
Okay.
right?
So basically the Great Filter is like, we may not even know what it is,
Mhm.
but it's the thing which may separate millions of life forms from the one or the few that actually end up being successful interstellar
Yep.
species. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Exactly.
Ah,
It's
okay.
the wall between all of the species we know of and the ones that can become interstellar. And we don't even know if we can yet,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And I'm a skeptic there, honestly.
I am too. Yeah, I am too. It's hard for me to imagine us going from where we are to like traveling at light speed and
Yeah.
doing it in any kind of a coordinated, sustainable way. You know, let's talk for a moment about like what would it take for us to reach light speed,
I have no idea.
right? I mean, and even if we could, let's say that we were capable, we were discussing this earlier, how would we come out of light speed in any kind of safe or predictable way?
I don't think we have a great hope of sending us anywhere at light speed.
Oh, okay.
But here's an idea. I remember Stephen Hawking. There was an idea that was being thrown around his death that he was thinking of a way to send basically thousands of little probes somewhere near the speed of light using lasers. I think it was lasers. I don't know. Fuck. And it was a cool idea, but it would basically be capsules. I don't know what even the point was. Maybe it's sending information. I don't know if they'd hopefully be able to relay information back, and they could go super fast. Now, think about doing that, but then sending tardigrades. Do you know what tardigrades are?
No,
Oh, man.
never heard
Oh,
of it.
God. Okay. If you're listening, just Google this. And Arjuna should too. But they look like microscopic gummy bears, but instead of 4 legs, they have 8, I think. Maybe it's 6. And they are super resilient. They can survive in space.
I have heard
They-
about these
okay.
things. They're like the ultimate tiny little life form.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
we think we're cool, but tardigrades are fucking way
These
cooler.
are like the cockroaches of the microscopic
Yep.
world.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, they're badasses. So if we send some of those guys out, maybe some other simpler organisms, basically we could end up
They'll
seeding
just
life
be
on other...
Our ambassadors.
Yeah. And
That's-
they will spawn intelligent life in,
Yeah.
several 100 million years.
Yeah.
hmm
So that, that's a cool idea. And it actually made me think, it made me wonder if our best chance of communicating with other life forms might be, because we already know that light travels, it's like the fastest thing we know of, right? Supposing we just develop lasers that are strong enough to like send pulses of light, kind of like how fiber optics work today, right? So supposing we just send out these pulses of light at a strong enough frequency, I don't know, that could be something, right?
I'm hoping that's what we're doing with our microwaves, right?
Is
'Cause
that what they're
you could
doing?
do
Okay.
exactly the same thing with that, I would think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, same principle.
Yep.
Okay, fair.
Yep.
Fair. Because I mean, yeah, you're right. It's like
Mm-hmm.
transmitting anything larger is just kind of insane.
Just say hello
yeah. You know?
in all of our
to get
languages.
that conversation started.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the Great Filter. I'm curious, Robin, do you think that aliens are already among us? What do you think about that? Like the Men in Black scenario.
I want to believe.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And whenever I see a story on the internet about, like 4 Air Force pilots saw a extremely sophisticated, what must have been an extremely sophisticated drone program, or it was aliens, over the Atlantic. I'm like, oh, I really hope it was aliens.
Did we get that?
I definitely am rooting for that.
Yeah.
I want the universe to be bigger than us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite songs is, I think it's just called the Galaxy Song from Monty Python.
Oh yeah, just remember that you're standing on a planet that's revolving.
Yep. And the song ends with, basically we hope there's other life out there because it's bugger all down here on Earth.
Yep.
Great song, look it up.
Okay. So that's kind of where you land on
It's like a lot of the stuff I see on the Fermi Paradox, and I should definitely give a shout out here to it's called a Kurzagot YouTube channel, or if you look up In a Nutshell, or if you just Google Fermi Paradox videos, it'll be the first thing that pops up. It's this neat little animated video. It's like 6 minutes long. And it's one of the inspirations for me, even wanting to cover this topic. And they do 2 videos on the Fermi Paradox and also one on the Great Filter. And their video on the Great Filter is discussing that it would be bad news, basically, if we found life on other planets near us that wasn't intelligent, because it would be a sign that life is prolific, but there's a filter there that prevents it from becoming very advanced in a way that it would become intergalactic. And I don't care. I have this very Zen attitude about life on Earth, where I don't know why I feel this way, but I think humans are pretty cool, but we're not that cool. In our current state, I think we have some, improvements could be made. And if we just didn't make it, it's I just don't care. It wouldn't not be that big of a shame to me if we didn't become I would almost be I would have maybe a feeling of dread if we ended up colonizing other star systems, because I don't know if I really trust us.
Yeah.
I think I'm rooting for the other aliens out there who've got their shit more figured out than we do, based on what I'm seeing on this planet. And that makes me sound like a terrible cynic, and maybe I'm more than I realize, but I think on a broad scale, I'm not I don't know. Am I really that way?
So here's a question. Are you more afraid of us colonizing and making war with other unwitting species than you are about other species making war on us?
Yeah, I think so. I'm dealing with the same sample size of one, that everyone else is. And so there's no reason for me to give aliens the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
It's kind of funny. I'm thinking of Star Trek now. The first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation is an alien life form putting humans on trial.
Right.
And asking us if we're actually worthy to be a starfaring civilization. And Jean-Luc Picard gives a really good argument. And when I watch that show, I'm 100% with him. And I just wonder how many... You know what? I take it back. I'm not a cynic. I think we could do this.
Yeah.
I just think we're having growing pains right now as a civilization. And it's a rough time in some ways. And I don't mean to say that the world is shit or anything, because I think that we're actually doing really well in a lot of ways. It's just things feel really precarious to me. And maybe that's just the political climate at the moment. But
yes, and the ecological climate.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't necessarily think we should go deep into this, but I think it is worth just noting that there are a lot of people who see SpaceX or stuff like this, and they just say like, hey, why are you guys investing billions of dollars into space travel when, the spaceship we're on right now kind of needs some repairs?
I'm kind of there.
You
Yeah.
know? Exactly.
Like the old Chris Rock joke is like, put a man on the moon, or like put a man on Mars, put a man in an apartment. Like,
right. So, there is some credence to that. It almost makes me wonder if we won't truly be worthy of space travel or even capable of space travel until we can get over some of these base, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Number 1, stay alive, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe if we can just actually get good enough at staying alive and not messing up the planet, then maybe we can graduate. Maybe that's the great filter.
we're doing good at that, but in long term,
We have been.
Yes.
So far.
yeah.
Who knows what the 21st century is
That
going to
reminds me, with the great filter research, people have kind of looked into this, and having a sustainable civilization is definitely one of the barriers.
Yeah.
And people have looked at Easter Island as kind of the classic example of environmental catastrophe leading to societal collapse. And yeah, it's a microcosm, just a little island. If you fuck that up, you're screwed. And on a global scale, it's a little more abstract. Like, well, like there's always like, we can't screw everything up, can we?
Yeah.
And, we just don't really know, right? I mean, we know that climate change is definitely going to compromise the patterns that we're used to.
Yeah.
But even with that, it looks like there's going to be winners and losers, and there's going to be huge cost, right?
Yeah.
To life, to stability, projections of warfare, famine, ugly things.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, before we cut out here, I just want to explore another idea which some people have come up with to explain the Fermi Paradox, which is that the idea that maybe alien life exists, but it's deliberately not contacting us. Right? So some people call this like the zoo hypothesis.
Oh,
or
really?
Like the nature preserve hypothesis.
No.
So it's the idea that, they're like, oh, those humans, like, we'll just let them live in their natural environment.
I've seen the zoo scenario term thrown around. I didn't understand that that's what it was.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Another people will call it like the planetarium hypothesis, where it's like, maybe it's like deliberately isolated. Maybe it's like a like maybe there's a reason that they wouldn't want to get us sick, or there's just all of these other reasons why people might just want to keep another life.
They're xenophobic.
Could be. Yeah, maybe they just don't like us, right?
Yeah, or they're afraid of other things.
Yeah. Now, okay, here's an interesting one. People start to get into simulation theory again.
Ooh.
Which I feel like every philosophical question seems to hook back into simulation theory at some point. But
it's like, we're gonna create a simulation with organisms on a tiny orb.
Exactly.
That's impossibly far away from anything else it could possibly interact with.
Maybe we're an experiment, a little simulative experiment,
Sold.
So, yeah, anyway, I don't know. I think when it comes down to it, like, part of me feels like every life form on Earth is an alien life form. You know what I mean? It's like we're all our own little universes, right? We're all our own deals. And it's interesting how they're even, like they find life in the Marianas Trench and stuff like this. Or think about this. let's say in 100 years we get a lot better at, maybe a lot more hungry for terrestrial resources, and we start digging like miles down into the earth, right? If we then discover life down there, that life could be every bit as alien to us as anything that might come out of the sky.
Well, here's another thing is we're calling ourselves the dominant life form on the planet.
Right.
And this definition that we have kind of mastered, we think we've mastered the resources on the planet in order to capture energy and use it to do work. Yeah. To do the things we want to do with electricity primarily. And it's funny to think if plants had thought and consciousness, they might see themselves in the very same way.
Well, exactly. You know,
and they would look at us like, oh, there's like these little tiny settlements of humans encroaching on us. Like,
yeah, sometimes they go rogue and kill more of us than we would like, right? How unevolved and
I don't know.
Belligerent they are. No, I think it's fascinating. Like, wouldn't it be great if like ETs come down to the planet all the time and they land
and talk to the plants?
Yeah, they talk to the plants, right? And they're just like, oh, these fucking annoying humans keep showing up and we have to erase their memories.
Or the classic like Douglas Adams scenario is that aliens find us and they think the dominant life form is cars.
I mean, it just goes to show, right? It's like, you know, maybe the moon is teeming with life and we just don't prioritize any of the things, right? We don't see it. So, boy, I don't know. After discussing this for around an hour or so, I'm just further convinced that there are so many possible outcomes and possible realities that could, you know, I think in a way, what I like about the Fermi Paradox is that I think it just highlights the paradox of existence, right? That there are just so many aspects about reality, which when you start digging into them are both true and not true, right? I think space is a classic example about how, like, matter, let's talk about matter for a moment. We experience a tangible existence, but our recent discoveries have shown that most of tangible existence is just space. It's like, I mean, it's like, what is it, like 99.99, you know, it's some many number of nines of the entirety of reality is just nothing. Yeah. Right? And yet, our main experience of it is a physical experience. To me, that strikes me as paradoxical. Or the idea that different organisms experience time differently, right? Like if you interviewed our planet and talked about what its experience of life had been, it would tell you a story that might not even include us. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like that difference in the time scale between the planet and human life, to me, that seems paradoxical. Yeah. It's like there's such opposite experiences of the same thing.
Right. There's a great little video made by some German animators called The Wheel, which is a story of a few stones who exist in geologic time. And then they're just hanging out being rocks throughout most of the video and chit-chatting, and there's like moss growing on them and weather and time lapse and stuff like that. And then civilization toward the end of the video just kind of like pops up and disappears, and they're like, oh, that was interesting.
Right, just a blip. Yeah,
that's interesting. So the way that I sit with all of this is similar to the way that I sit with individual death, like my own death, and that it's inevitable, and I think I'm great, but I don't think I deserve eternity. And I feel exactly the same way about the human race. Now, the human race, I'm an organism, right? Which is different than a branch of life. Humans are at the terminal of a very ancient line of life, and we have the opportunity as a species to evolve. And that's interesting to me. Now, the species, Homo sapiens as we know it at the moment, who cares, right? It's either going to branch out and evolve, or it's going to die, right? We've all had to think about our own deaths, and we've all had to come to some peace with them. And there's so many other people in the universe that, or just on our planet, that have yet to be born, that I'm stoked they're coming, and that they're going to have their opportunity. And that's exactly how I feel about other species that aren't humanity, is that we all have our time, and then it's gone. And then the universe moves on to the next permutation.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Listening Glass. If you've enjoyed this show, we'd love it if you'd share it with your friends and on social media. Your word of mouth means a lot to us and is a way you can help our humble podcast grow. Find us on our Twitter handle @ListeningGlass. You can leave feedback there or by emailing us at listeningglasscast@gmail.com. Join the ongoing discussion in our community by joining our Discord server, links in our episode description.